After years of leaks and speculation, the Switch 2 is finally here. For some people. The days of system launches being a fun event to look forward to are a quaint memory from the before times. Gone are the battalions of booth babes. Nowadays you're lucky if they shackle even one woman to a piece of hardware. No, now we're pitted against hordes of fellow nerds and hopelessly inadequate servers to fight tooth and nail for the chance to queue for a ticket to possibly reserve a chance to buy an extremely overpriced piece of underwhelming hardware, and the few who prevail will be winnowed down by random cancellations, card declines, porch pirates, and fucking staples until they rue ever growing an interest in this hobby. Why? Because fuck you! Fuck everything! But if you didn't manage to get a Switch 2 yet, fret not, because I'm here to satiate your curiosity with a content dump. No one else is bothering to do this, I'm your only hope. I'll share my impressions of the hardware, software, and the general foundation Nintendo has set for the next generation, all in futuristic HDR. The system has seen major size and weight boosts, but it still feels much closer to a Switch 1 than the Steam Deck, which is a certified chonker. This is also a certified chonker. The new Joy-Cons take advantage of the extra space with larger buttons, though they still feel a little cramped. Running and jumping in Breath of the Wild requires holding B while pressing X, which is easy on the Pro but still nearly impossible on the Joy-Cons. Either the stick gets in the way or every button gets mashed at once. The new layout at least offers enough room that you can pull it off when you find just the right angle. The size increase is more valuable in single Joy-Con mode. The shoulder buttons are much wider and have a lighter press, making Mario Kart in particular more comfortable. The sticks have a larger cap and a slight improvement in tilt range. Rotation is much smoother and they have more space for small motions before ramping to full speed. I should note that I'm using Ghoulie Kit Hall effect sticks in the old Joy-Cons. The originals would feel even worse than these. The new sticks still pale in comparison to the full-sized ones on the Steam Deck, and there's little evidence that the drifting issues have been fixed. Despite Nintendo's claims about them being redesigned from the ground up, teardowns have found them to be using the same basic potentiometer design.
It's essentially exactly the same.
Patents suggest that there could be lower friction and carbon wear, though the only visible difference seems to be a smaller wiper. Time will tell, but given their history of claiming that they had addressed the issue while the sticks kept right on drifting, I'm not inclined to give them the benefit of the doubt. They're also not as easy to repair, and it's unclear if the magnetic connectors will cause problems for Hall effect replacements. In the worst case scenario, Hall or TMR sticks could still work with split Joy-Cons but not in handheld mode, since the magnets are only in the system itself. I assume aftermarket sellers like Ghoulie Kit will have a comment on this soon. The magnetic connection also downgrades the Joy-Con grip by requiring a cutaway for attachment from the side. It's not exactly uncomfortable, but the hard edge might annoy those who used the Gen 1 grip heavily. The upside of the magnets is that they are much more satisfying and convenient to use. The Joy-Cons basically snap themselves in when they're close. They also make for a more rigid fit than the wobbly originals. Ditching the rails made the genius new mouse mode possible, which I imagine Nintendo at least partly added to entice the PC-centric deck audience. I've always promoted Gyro for shooters, but it's not suited to tasks that demand a stable cursor, like Mario Maker or Sims. The trackpads on the deck also leave a lot to be desired, with too little space to get precise movement. Having a real mouse paired with gyro and analog sticks at once is a potentially huge deal, but there are some big compromises holding it back. The Joy-Cons are too narrow to glide comfortably, even with the grip attached. I found that they were prone to tipping on any surface with friction, including an actual mouse pad. The sensor doesn't work on glass, which my Logitech mouse has no trouble with. It's probably not a surprise that this isn't a high-end gaming sensor, which is fair. Fortnite is the only game I have access to with mouse support, so I used my niece's account to... What is this? How do you start the... Why is Ariana Grande's pig... What is all this? I'm too old. I need help.
Make it stop.
I'm too old. I need help. I'm too old.
Make it stop.
No, Batman doesn't dance. I didn't want in the car. I can't get out. What the fuck? I found I could stabilize the mouse by moving my thumb off the buttons into the very bottom of the grip. I was able to get decent results, but the pressure needed to keep it upright made fine movement juddery. In the end, I still thought Gyro was faster and more comfortable, but with the right surface and a wider third-party grip, the mouse mode could be great. The Pro controller has seen fewer changes, but they're all worth noting. First, the D-pad is back to being a piece of shit. My go-to test has been to hold a direction down while wiggling back and forth. Ideally, only the direction being held will register. The new Pro rampantly inputs unpressed directions and failed a wall jumping test in Super Metroid. Unwanted diagonals constantly cause Samus to morph into a ball or aim upward. This is actually worse than the later Gen 1 controllers, which had improved their pads enough that I didn't think the tape mod was necessary anymore, though I still did it to clean up the remaining junk inputs. The mod should still work, but it will now require breaking adhesive, which sucks to have to do on an $85 device. I've seen many people claim that the D-pad is fine, and if yours is, great. Mine absolutely isn't, and a wide manufacturing variance that allows bad pads is still the fault of Nintendo and fair to criticize, especially since this was the criticism of the first gen version. The rest of the changes are mostly positive. There's finally a headphone jack for plugging in from the couch. The buttons and sticks have smoother action and make much less noise as a result. It's especially nice on the sticks, which feel as if they're hitting an inflatable rubber bumper. Normally, the stick is stopped by its gate, which leads to grinding and dust. These are designed so that the dome bottoms hit a rubber ring on the board first, and the stick posts have been made thinner to avoid contacting the gate as soon. Like the Joy-Cons, the sticks use a custom design that may reduce drift, plus they're plug-in replaceable. I can say from experience that desoldering the old ones was not fun, so even if the disassembly itself is harder than before, a stick replacement should be much easier overall. The grips are slimmer, apparently to emulate the GameCube controller shape. I personally like the fuller Gen 1 shape better, but eliminating the removable grip seams makes up for it. The controller is noticeably lighter, to the point that I busted out a scale to measure them, and the new material feels smoother and cooler to the touch. All changes that should make longer sessions more comfortable. Back buttons are a great addition, but games apparently won't use them for unique actions. They only double one of the existing buttons. I plan to use them for the stick-click actions, which is good enough, but they should be even more handy on PC. One of my favorite changes is that start and select are elevated rather than flush with the controller. It's almost impossible to mistake them for home or capture now, and your thumb finds them effortlessly. Battery life is listed as 40 hours like the old Pro, despite capacity being lower. Nintendo has over-delivered on battery with every Pro model, so there's no reason to doubt the claimed specs. I charged it once after unboxing and have put at least 15 hours on it without a dent on the meter. A patent suggested that Switch 2 pads would include magnetometers for drift correction. That appears to be true. iFixit identified the Joy-Con IMU as a 6-axis TDK part, but there's a separate 3-axis Hall effect compass. That not only means motion should be more reliable, but also leaves some hope for Hall effect stick replacements. Even without 9-axis sensing, a new IMU should have lower error rates and less drift, and the pulling rate should be higher this time. The old controller pulled at 66 Hz, which would not be enough for 120 FPS gameplay. Unfortunately, it's hard to test without more native Switch 2 titles or PC support. The polling rate applet doesn't work yet, and the controller wasn't recognized by Bluetooth. This is on the latest firmware for what it's worth. As a quick, dumb test, I calibrated both pads and then shook them in 10-second intervals. The new Pro seemed to hold onto its center point better, while the old one consistently drifted to the ceiling. I tried similar tests elsewhere, but there were no clear results. The Gyro should be the newest and best around, but you should mainly expect that to just amount to less recentering. Both controllers have improved haptics, and unlike last time, they use completely different actuators. The Pro haptics look similar to before but larger, while the Joy-Cons use a new squarish unit. I stole this paywalled information for free on the internet. The layers of plastic in the old Pro grips diluted the strength compared to the Joy-Cons, but in the games I've tested, the reverse is now true, with the Pro controller having the better rumble. I also heard a much more pronounced speaker effect on some events. I had never even noticed the coin sound on the old Pro controller. Sony stole Nintendo's thunder with the DualSense, and I was hoping Switch 2 would close the gap, but even the new Pro doesn't feel as powerful as Sony's pad. You can feel individual boards as you drive over them in Mario Kart, but only as the faintest of taps, so weak that the haptic effect is almost pointless. Fast Fusion, on the other hand, has much stronger effects, so anemic rumble seems to be a software side problem more than hardware. There are still missed opportunities to use haptics all over. Breath of the Wild has now received 2 paid updates and still doesn't have full haptic support. The feature is definitely better, but it doesn't live up to the hype early impressions were heaping on it. A few miscellaneous changes have really grown on me. The cartridge flap has a slot on the back that makes it much easier to gain purchase. The kickstand is no longer an unbalanced little joke and can actually hold the system stable at various angles. It's not as sturdy as the OLED version, but time will tell if that actually leads to breakage issues. The dock now includes a LAN port. No dongle needed. and it seems redesigned to avoid scratching the screen. That was a known problem with the original, to the point that I taped a microfiber cloth in to pad the interior. The new interior is extremely glossy and has no rails. In fact, it doesn't contact the screen anywhere. While this is an improvement, it also leaves the system free to shake around quite a bit, and the dock itself bends inward easily. I would strongly suggest connecting all cables to the dock before putting your Switch in, otherwise you may pinch the screen. The screen is a big upgrade over the launch Switch, with higher frame rates, resolution, and size, though the most striking difference to me was the color saturation. It falls short of the expectations set by Nintendo though. This is not a real HDR screen. Sequences that measure up to 1000 nits in docked mode barely cracked 200 on camera. This isn't an ideal method since it changes with exposure, but if the screen were HDR you'd be able to see it. I'll prove it. Look. You see? Did you see it? In direct comparison, the color and contrast are worse than the OLED. I filmed both systems at once, so the exposure and settings are identical. Switch 2 measures slightly brighter, but to the eye the OLED appears to have higher peaks due to its contrast. There have been a lot of complaints about ghosting, so I set my camera to 120 FPS to see what the fuss was about. I was surprised by how blatant the issue is. Almost every object persists for a couple of frames, as you can see on Bullet Bill. It's not as noticeable to the naked eye, but when taking a closer look, practically every detail is lost to a nauseating kind of double vision. I'm not trashing the new screen as much as I am noting its limits. It is again better than what the Switch or Deck launched with, but Nintendo is leaving a lot of room for the inevitable OLED revision. A number of Switch games have major enhancement patches that add HDR, but I was confused to see it in practically everything else as well. My first thought was that RTX HDR was being applied, and when testing Resolve's RTX plugin on Switch 1 captures, the waveforms did look pretty similar. But there were also new spikes the Switch 2 captures didn't have. It seems like Switch 2 is just tone mapping with a much higher white point instead. 203 is the standard for SDR content in an HDR container, but games were mapping to over 400. There was no rhyme or reason to the captures I measured. Super Metroid hit 1000 in its menus, and SNES games were so overbrightened that I considered them outright broken. It was partly a calibration problem. The first menu sets your peak brightness, while the second image slider apparently calibrates the SDR white point. It seems similar to the slider in the Windows HDR settings. I hadn't changed this value because you have to enter an optional menu which doesn't indicate any target. Everything looked fine, so I left it at default, with none of the images indicating how ridiculously high that value would be in other content. HDTV test found that the calibration doesn't work unless your screen supports HGIG, which mine does not. Tone mapping will compress high values to fit within the screen's range, so the sun will still display even at values above the screen's peak, and by the time it finally does disappear, the left image almost goes with it. If this is what you're seeing, the only current answer is to own Cyberpunk. Its calibration menu apparently pulls the system values and shows you what they are, which makes it double fucking ridiculous the system itself isn't doing that. Using that menu, forum goers have ascertained that 0 is 80 nits, and each click adds 10, so 92 clicks above 0 should set a peak of 1000. 5 or 6 clicks up on the slider should set at 200 nit paper white, and I confirmed this in Resolve, but the SNES app is still peaking higher than that. The calibration is terrible and needs a complete overhaul. Having more patterns and giving numerical values like the Windows tool would help. Setting 200 as the default white point for SDR is also a no-brainer, rather than leaving it an unmarked, arbitrary point on the slider. Even apart from that, the tone mapping just seems broken in some apps, so you may want to choose the setting that disables it in SDR content. Native Switch 2 games also have issues with their HDR implementations being phoned in. The developer behind Dolby Vision on Xbox wrote a piece on Mario Kart that I recommend if you're interested in this kind of thing. The short version is that the game is Rec 709 simply stretched to HDR at the end of the pipeline. For contrast, Fast Fusion has real HDR grading. It constantly peaks to 1000 but doesn't look over bright or gaudy. It's balanced with the highest values mostly reserved for pickups in your car to improve readability. The HDR allows convincing exposure changes when going from dark to light areas, and the effect just doesn't work with the limited headroom of SDR. Almost every highlight detail gets clipped, so the sky is often just a white blur. Unlike Mario Kart, the SDR clips can't be faked to match HDR, because there's genuine new detail in the highlights. If Nintendo hadn't transitioned away from SDR pipelines yet, they may have been better off if they had just used RTX to boost everything. The point here isn't that the fake HDR looks bad, just that hopefully future titles are able to leverage this better. One feature I do like is that in docked mode you can now check exactly what resolution and color space are being output at any time, which does help with troubleshooting. In terms of processing power, the Switch 2 is simultaneously exciting and disappointing, offering almost the worst case scenario while still delivering an acceptable leap over the first system. For more details, I'll turn things over to my terrible Richard Ledbetter impersonation.
Right, here I am then, inside a Switch 2 unit, having undergone a first-of-its-kind process to shrink myself down
to mere nanometers. A guy shrink, if you will. Fascinating stuff.
I've traversed the Switch 2 circuitry firsthand, as it has traversed mine. Indeed, I am become Switch 2, a bespoke piece of its software, and our specifications are as follows. The main chip, an Ampere generation Tegra, taped out 4 years ago, as I saw when hiking the die myself. So, quite dated, though I would stop short of calling the new hardware a flop, owing to my recent romantic entanglements with the unit. The manufacturing process is none other than Samsung's 8nm, originally introduced in 2017, the very year Switch itself was launched. Right, it appears the batteries are low. I knew the risks when I took the assignment. I have no regrets. I've seen things you people wouldn't believe. I've sparked some rather unexpected friendships with a handful of electrons. I've performed the erotic haptic dance and counted transistors off the T239 shoulder by eye. All those moments in time lost like, well, teraflops in an AMD to NVIDIA Silicon comparison. Cracking on then, right, time to die.
To be as current as the Switch was at launch, the Switch 2 would have to be on the Ada architecture, which brought better efficiency and double the RT and AI core performance. But Ada chips were made for an expensive 5nm process that was probably never in the cards for this system. I can forgive using an older Ampere chip, but they paired it with an equally ancient 8nm node. There was grumbling about NVIDIA using that process in 2020, when AMD had been using a higher density 7nm node the year before. 7 is also what the PS5, Xbox, and Steam Deck started on, with the revisions upgrading to an even higher density 6. That leaves Switch 2 significantly out of step with any current console, and it may have impacted clock speeds. The original Switch had brutal performance limits to reduce power consumption and heat. Nintendo upgraded from 20 to 16nm for the revisions, which gave the chip far more headroom for overclocking. Modern vintage gamer found that forcing higher clocks not only resolved some performance issues, but allowed Breath of the Wild to double its frame rate. Had the Switch been able to use 16nm from the start, similar speeds could have been possible with the same battery life and heat of the launch model. Switch 2's clocks are once again compromised, with the GPU being an even lower percentage of the full chip potential than we got with Switch. One of the main considerations seems to have been output. Nintendo was able to manufacture a shitload of systems for launch, which would have been harder on newer, more in-demand nodes. For Nintendo's own games, the limits don't matter as much. I'll be happy enough to finally see Zelda and Metroid reach PS4 levels, but it does pose a major challenge for multi-platform support. PS4 Plus is where the Steam Deck lives, and it struggles to run current-gen games. Some are unable to reach 30 FPS even on the lowest settings. Switch 2 has the benefit of being a closed platform capable of far better optimization, but that doesn't magically make hard limits go away. Jensen Huang recently declared the Switch 2 the most powerful handheld ever,
the most advanced graphics ever in a mobile device.
Which can only be true when considering the RTX features exclusive to Nintendo in this space.
Dedicated AI processors to sharpen, animate, and enhance gameplay in real time.
The system is basically limping across the finish line with the help of AI, and even those features are limited by old tensor cores. Cyberpunk and Street Fighter are running as low as 540p and being upscaled with DLSS. That it works is impressive in its own way, but ambitious PS5 games like Grand Theft Auto 6 may be out of the question. To be clear, even an Ada chip would have faced severe limits. There was no scenario where Switch 2 could have been a powerhouse capable of running anything. But like the original Switch, it will struggle to keep up with the scale of multi-platforms and even its own exclusives in ways that higher clocks and better cores could have eased. I expect the Steam Deck 2 to trounce it, and probably at a not-so-distant price, as the original deck did. For perspective, the deck was using a better process node while having comparable handheld performance and a lower price point 3 years ago. Valve currently offers a unit with an even better node, twice the storage, a far superior OLED screen, and better quality inputs for $50 more than the Switch 2 bundle, not to mention the lack of online paywalls and lower game prices. Judge the value for yourself, but I don't consider Switch 2 a very good deal. Most people don't care this much about specs and will just judge by how the games look and run. Enhancement patches are one of the best demonstrations of what the new hardware can do in practice, and I'm happy to see Nintendo is delivering what I've been advocating for years: competitive performance against emulators. At the risk of this video and my pale indoor body getting seized by stormtroopers, I'm going to make some comparisons to defunct Switch emulators, this time with the twist that they actually flatter Nintendo. Mario Odyssey can run at 4K on PC, but the clarity makes the low LOD and animation stand out badly. Switch 2 offers a far smoother and more comprehensive upgrade, and the same was true for the other games I tested. It is possible to get 60 FPS in Breath of the Wild on PC, but ideally through Cemu, which requires a Wii U version that almost no one bought. I do genuinely dump my own games, and it's harder to get the mod, updates, and DLC set up for the Switch version. And once you do, you still won't have HDR or the improved LOD, and shader compilation and stability will be major headaches. This is the first time I've ever been able to say that it is better to revisit these games on Nintendo hardware than my high-powered gaming PC, and I commend them for doing more than just the bare minimum backwards compatibility. This is assuming they press on and update the Metroid games as well, if not 0 out of 10 for the whole system. The Switch 2 flash storage theoretically offers read speeds up to 2 GB per second, but it seems to perform the same as microSD Express at 1 GB per second. That's still 10 times faster than Switch. Nintendo is also using a file decompression engine, which should boost speeds even higher depending on the ratio achieved. The load times I measured are better but inconsistent. Tears of the Kingdom took 19 seconds to load on Switch versus 9 with the Switch 2 edition. Link's Awakening took 57 seconds on Switch versus 3 seconds with the upgrade patch. I verified the install on Switch and ran the test again to make sure something wasn't wrong with it. Mario 3D World took about the same amount of time to load on either system, but Bowser's Fury was 39 seconds on Switch and 5 on Switch 2. Breath of the Wild took 28 seconds to load from a cartridge on Switch versus 16 with the Switch 2 edition. Mario Odyssey, also on cart, took 21 seconds to load on Switch versus 20 on Switch 2. So depending on the game and format, the loads can be about the same or blazingly fast. This upgrade should shine the most during gameplay by enabling new mechanics and travel options that never would have been viable before, or at the very least it will make existing mechanics run smoother. The limits of the original Switch are plain to see when moving faster than the storage can keep up with in the Zelda games. Developers should be able to do a lot with 10 or even 20 times more speed, but it still may not be enough for multi-platform ports. I don't think Nintendo could have done much more here without abandoning physical media, which is bottlenecked around 1 GB per second. The carts are already expensive to produce, and the system uses the fastest current SD card format. A faster internal NVMe drive would have imbalanced the storage options badly. The only major Switch 2 game right now is Mario Kart World, which looks similar to 8 on the surface but has a clear increase in fine detail. Just look at Wario's ass. Look at his threads. The new food items pack way more detail and charm than a player would be able to appreciate in motion. And the game maintains this level of fidelity with a huge open world that never hangs or stutters, even when boosting at the highest possible speeds. As an early tech demo for the system, Mario Kart World is an impressive success. As a game, it's the most annoying thing I've ever played. Someone at Nintendo thought what Mario Kart needed more of is assholes shooting things at each other, so they doubled the player count. It is pretty much the whirlwind shit show I imagined when first hearing there would be 24 players. If you ever thought that you could barely even drive due to the constant interference from shells and bolts, that was just a warm-up. This is the clusterfuck's final form. I will say that the problem isn't as bad in solo as it is in multiplayer, but whether that's due to better human competition or game balancing, I don't know. The chaos is supposedly meant to give less skilled drivers a chance to pull ahead, but it only makes things harder for racers in the middle of the pack. Apart from occasional blue shells, first place is still relatively peaceful. Behind that, the road is absolutely choked with exploding weapons and carts to the point that you literally can't drive forward. The maps seldom feel like they're matched to the player count, alternating between bottlenecks that get absurdly crowded or wide open, boring stretches of road that feel empty. Water has been made a pace-killing slog to get across. Almost every level has a span where you jet ski across the surface at low speed, and I still don't know what the appeal of it is supposed to be. I mean, I'm seriously considering a score as low as 8.5. The developers tacitly acknowledged that the freeways were boring, so they added mechanics like jumping in place and tricking off walls. The opportunities to use these don't come up often enough to change much, and they're definitely not as interesting as anti-gravity was last time. Open world roaming is the hook this time, and the main appeal is that races can be entirely connected without brakes. You can even configure your own routes in Versus mode. It is undeniably neat to see such seamless connections between tracks, but it also reduces their unique characters. Tracks have transitional areas that are kind of a vague mush, and it sometimes feels like the real stage never kicks in. There are just stretches of highway and then the race ends. They added traffic everywhere to fill the void and accidentally turned half the levels into Toad's Turnpike. The score is full of great renditions of Mario series music, but they meander in and out randomly, so you'll hear music on ghost tracks that is decidedly not spooky. Though I can't complain much because this soundtrack fucks. Some levels still have great distinct designs, but the batting average is lower than usual. I'd rank a lot of these alongside Mario Kart 8's forgettable DLC tour tracks. Battle mode also suffers, with most maps reverting to the maligned Wii U style, where drivers try to find one another on long, barren stretches of road. The free roam is about as fun as driving on a real interstate. You'll find a lot of mini-challenges that basically require you to hold the gas button down for 10 seconds, and the reward is a sticker that you'll likely never look at again. You can also participate in far more boring races than the ones you could be doing in the normal game at any time. If you've ever just wasted time screwing around to see what's out there in past games, then you can get a similar satisfaction from this, but I could never go long before thinking, that's it, and exiting. Of all the franchises to succumb to open world bloat, I didn't think Mario Kart would be next on the list. The mode might be fun with multiplayer, but for obvious memory and processing reasons, the system can't support 2 open world sessions locally. If your friends and family are all equipped with Switch 2s, maybe you can get something out of it. My family shared the same frustrations, and at times we unanimously elected to turn it off after just one match, but it didn't stop us from playing it again the next day. There's an addicting quality that keeps luring you back to wade through the shit again and again. It's a fantastic looking game with hours of fun to be had, but I think it's a step down from 8 in quality and certainly in quantity after being spoiled with 96 tracks. We'll probably never see that much content in a Mario Kart game again, given that the series skipped last gen in favor of updates to the Wii U game. If you're still happy to play Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, you can safely skip this and save yourself the $80. And that's my final point on the Switch 2 launch: the cost. Nintendo is doing what companies tend to do after massive successes: completely give in to arrogance and greed. It's what led to the overpriced PS3 and 3DS failing at launch. People have justified $80 games with inflation charts and old ad flyers, but there are problems with those comparisons. One being that the majority of sales are now digital. The logistics and costs of manufacturing, shipping, warehousing, and balancing the supply and demand of physical products have been minimized. Maybe more importantly, the direct nature of the eShop means there's no retailer split taken from revenue. Downloaded games also can't be resold, reducing sales lost to the used market, and the eShop can lock permanent high prices in while said market inevitably drives physical to get cheaper over time. They could reflect all of this in the official pricing, but they usually don't, making digital sales more profitable by far. Switch 2's handheld development scope is closer to systems from a decade ago than the PS5. That its games cost $10 more doesn't make sense. There are now alternate revenue streams that didn't exist before: DLC, microtransactions, online paywalls, which are so lucrative that the industry has heavily shifted to them as a primary business model. Fortnite makes billions of dollars and it's free.
What the fuck is that?
Nintendo has integrated its online paywall into more and more software, sometimes making it impossible to fully access content and features without ponying up. And they've continued to do it without opening the door even a crack to dedicated servers or meaningful netcode improvements.
Anytime I press more than a couple buttons, it fucking dies.
A few people have asked me to comment on the new Switch Online editions, and to be blunt, I don't want to keep revisiting it just to keep reaching the same conclusion over and over. It's half-hearted junk that no one with access to a good PC should use. There have been reports of high latency, inaccurate stick mapping issues, saves spontaneously erasing, and sound and graphics bugs. All I can say from a safe distance is that at least GameCube support exists and isn't the full-on train wreck that N64 was. Some of the enhanced upgrade patches are paid content. A few glaring exceptions aside, the PS5 set the precedent that next-gen updates would be mostly free, and some of those are as substantial as what Nintendo is charging for. On the other hand, this is the company that resold Wii U games at full price last generation, and a Tropical Freeze port for an even higher price than Wii U. By Nintendo's standards, $10 is almost generous, but those fees will add up fast if they become common in future patches. I mean, you could buy 3 copies of Hentai Girls DJ Romance for that money. They even killed off the meager gold coin rewards that saved you a couple dollars per year, which, as a reminder, had been one of Iwata's ideas. Consider all of this in the appropriate context. The Switch made more money than any of Nintendo's previous systems, combined according to some metrics. That's how absurdly profitable Nintendo currently is. One report suggests they aren't selling Switch 2 at a loss, and may not have been even at a $399 price point. Granted, tariff fuckery justifies a buffer in this case, but they could have stopped at $70 games like everyone else and been just fine. That band-aid has already been ripped off, gamers have rolled over and accepted it, as they always do. They didn't have to push it, but they did, and $80 will likely become the standard on every platform now. They didn't have to charge $10 for the pack-in game. I'm still not over the sheer audacity of making you pay to be welcomed. Some people have tried to justify even this by claiming that it has mini-games. It's more than just a brochure. Astro's Playroom was considered exceptional by pack-in standards, and it was free. Aperture Desk Job offered half an hour of fun gameplay and acting by J.K. Simmons and Nate Bargatze.
I think I put the wrong tape in. Hold on.
Good luck, world's best scientist.
Okay, here we go.
You, in the overalls. Get to work, or you're fired.
They don't give out overalls anymore.
That was not a cheap thing for Valve to just give away.
So, okay. That's the police.
Even Reggie Fils-Aimé made a veiled criticism by pointing out how much more successful the Wii was in America after he fought to make Wii Sports a free pack-in. Selling it separately in other regions wasn't a good move for anyone. Nintendo charges more for less because their fans not only accept it but demand it and fight for it. There are forum threads filled with dismissals of the mountain of carefully measured screen data collected by practically every tech channel, on the grounds that all of them are rage-baiting attempts to drive engagement. You can't even criticize a faulty D-pad without a defense force rising up and denying your controller has a problem.
It's time because I have another Switch 2 Pro controller. Still does it.
After watching this creator confirm the issue on a second controller, some of the comments suggested the problem was that he hadn't updated its firmware. What the fuck? Criticism is not inherently negative. It often leads to positive changes being made. Everything I've complained about in this video is actionable. Some of it could be fixed with software updates right now. Asking better of a company that absolutely has the means to do better is not unreasonable. Unlike the PS3 or 3DS, there seems to be no consequence for overgreeding this time. Maybe everyone was just desperate to get a unit before tariffs took hold. Or maybe all of the economic turmoil of the past 5 years has busted our brains and erased the defense mechanisms that used to make us care about getting screwed. Either way, Nintendo has gotten away with it, and I'm left with mixed feelings about Switch 2. It is a sorely needed upgrade, and I'm very glad I never have to play a release on the old Switch ever again. But I'm not sure Switch 2 is as good of a system for its time. I expect another generation of fantastic first-party games, unrelenting high prices, bad internet, possible continuing controller failures, and rampant performance issues alongside a few miraculous ports that exceed everyone's expectations. First-party games will make it a must-have system soon, but it's not there yet. If you didn't get one at launch, you're not missing much. Feel free to wait until Prime 4 or whatever else you're into launches. For now, it's merely fine.
Units. Nanometers. Fascinating stuff. Electrons. Bespoke. Haptic dance. Bespoke. Haptic dance. Teraflops.
Silicon ballpark bottleneck bandwidth. Bespoke. Silicon clock speeds. T239.